Well, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. We're going to try and keep this to 30 minutes to respect your time. Just a couple of housekeeping items. You should be automatically muted when you join the call. We had over 50 people register, so we wanted to streamline this call. We also wanted to host this in the Zoom meeting feature, giving it more of a personal touch. So please turn on the video if you're able to. If not, no worries if you're eating lunch. Also, we encourage you to use the chat window, say hi, where are you calling in from? We have some people throughout the US and globally, internationally as well. I know obviously we have our staff as well calling in, but really encourage questions as well. So during the call, at the end, we'll leave room for questions, but please feel free to enter the questions during the call or at the end as well. Great. So really the purpose of this call is just a brief update on the coronavirus situation in Central America, specifically Nicaragua and Honduras. We had a similar call more than a year ago after the pandemic first hit. So we wanted to provide an update, but also go a little bit further into our programs, specifically the TAP and how we're working with communities to provide safe drinking water from the mountain to the fountain, or really from the water source to the tap in the home. My name is Wes Meyer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of EOS International. We're also fortunate to have Diana Cali and Alvaro Rodriguez, our co-founders and country directors of Honduras and Nicaragua, respectively. We're hosting this call in English for our English-speaking audience, but we'll have our staff available if there's any other questions that come up. And finally, this meeting is being recorded for those so we can share it after the fact who are not able to attend. So starting in Honduras, just have some statistics of the coronavirus and cases and deaths in the country. Over 233,000 confirmed cases and just over 6,000 deaths. Obviously a very high number. And we've even heard Diana shared that some of the funeral homes are reporting almost double these numbers. So obviously emerging markets and reporting, there's some challenges there, but ultimately still a very staggering number. However, vaccinations have arrived in Honduras, and to date, they're just under 3% of the country's the population is vaccinated. It's just over 200,000 people. They're actually using Social Security funds and or receiving donations from other countries to purchase these vaccines. And the goal is in the next 12 months to have everyone vaccinated. So I'm glad that they actually have a goal that's written and pushing forward for that. Also, travel restrictions, I mentioned last year, there were some pretty heavy travel restrictions put in place in Honduras where people weren't even allowed to leave their own city or their home based on the last number of their ID card. So every 10 days, they would be able to leave their home to go purchase groceries or other items. Those restrictions have since been lifted. But during the heat of the pandemic, there was a lot of travel restrictions. The government was very proactive in trying to squash the spread of the coronavirus. That obviously hampered our work as we send technicians out to rural communities. We're working in about 1,500 rural communities throughout the Nicaragua and Honduras. And those, getting out to the rural communities was what we had to stop completely. We were down for about 4 or 5 weeks. Until first we put in a protocol to figure out how we could travel safely without spreading the coronavirus. As well, we received critical health passes to be able to travel all around. Another major update from last year, many of you probably heard there were back-to-back hurricanes in both Honduras and Nicaragua, Hurricane Iota and Eta. And estimated losses in Honduras is over $2 billion. And this is according to the UN. Actually, the government estimated more at $10 billion. But some sources say this is a bit steep as their total GDP is 20 billion, 23 billion. So ultimately, nonetheless, significant losses. And a lot of this came from the heavy rains. So once the hurricane hit landfall, heavy rains were falling and a very slow moving rain so it just kept drenching and saturating the soil, causing significant damage to roads, bridges, over flooding of the rivers. And more specifically in the rural communities, trees were knocked down, boulders fell off the side of mountainsides, making travel really almost impossible. And again, our team had to pause our operations, but this time we were able to leverage our experience from the pandemic and how we could leverage mobile technology. So through text, we set up groups of WhatsApp between community leaders to keep in touch, to share best practices, even for the community leaders themselves to continue taking water quality measurements and sending us updates via WhatsApp. So we were able to kind of leverage that and provide remote, assistance, technical assistance and monitoring when we were unable to travel. And also the rural communities, we found this both in Nicaragua and Honduras, due to the heavy rains, a lot of the water systems were impacted. Either tanks were destroyed or not ruined, but damaged, water pipes that were buried or buried very deep, and the water washed it out and broke the pipes, or even where pipes crossed in a pipe bridge across the river, and the rivers were flooding, those broke. And so we went into go mode, helping the communities get the systems up and running quickly, creating temporary patches, temporary fixes, and now we're working with the communities for more of a longer term or permanent fixes to make sure the water is operating and running at a longer term. So that's kind of the situation in Nicaragua, and the hurricane situation, very similar in Nicaragua, or excuse me, that was in Honduras, but the hurricane situation is very similar in Nicaragua. Being neighbors to each other, the hurricanes kind of ran over and hit both areas, actually impacting all of our operations. So in Nicaragua, COVID cases, just above 7,000 confirmed cases and only 185 deaths. So I have an asterisk because comparing this 7,000 confirmed cases to the 233,000 in Honduras, obviously there's a lot of misreporting or underreporting. There's many of irregular pneumonia cases that were being reported in Nicaragua. It's really unfortunate. There's a lack of transparency in the reporting, but there's a citizens observatory group of citizens, medical health professionals that are anonymously reporting the data so they don't lose their job, but they've reported more than 3,000 deaths. So ultimately, it's really hard to kind of pinpoint the actual numbers, but again, very severe and significant impact in Nicaragua. About 2% of the population is now vaccinated, and they're receiving vaccinations from Russia, the Sputnik, who they have a very strong alliance with Russia, but also other donor countries. Contrary to Honduras, there were really no travel restrictions. And actually to the point where the government banned government officials from wearing masks so they wouldn't scare the public. So it's a very different approach to how they handled the pandemic. Economically speaking, the World Bank is expecting a growth rate of a negative 6% and or a drop in GDP by about 8%. So huge economic toll, both the pandemic, but also the back-to-back hurricanes. And they were estimating just under $1 billion or $750 million in losses in Nicaragua. So ultimately, a lot of issues. And to add to it, there are national presidential elections happening in November in both Nicaragua and Honduras. So we're just keeping our eye and focusing with the communities and making sure, keeping our heads down, staying out of the political limelight, but really trying to provide our solutions to the rural communities where fortunately the political arena it reaches, but it's not as active. And so the communities are a little more level-headed and we're able to continue our operations in the rural communities. So for years, EOS has been promoting water quality solutions. There's just under 12,000 rural communities. And when we do water tests for the first time going into the communities, we've tested over 85% of the time the water is contaminated with bacteria and the water is not safe to drink. And as the coronavirus has spread and turned into a pandemic, safe drinking water has become even more important. We help over 628,000 people in Central America get access to safe drinking water on an ongoing basis. And as I said, when the pandemic started, the demand for the water quality solutions significantly increased. And a lot of it, we were able to pull on our proven model, ensuring communities have safe drinking water. We found that, one, obviously, safe drinking water is a basic human right. But studies have shown that over 50% of unsupported community water systems fail within the first 5 years. And so, as I said, we've been working over the last decade focusing on water quality solutions, but our model has really evolved. We started from providing products and services just around the water quality, but now we're looking at it as a water utility, as a system, really enabling the communities to operate their water systems as an efficient water utility. We don't just swoop in and dig wells or install state-of-the-art, water systems. Rather, we work within the community to find a plan and resources to really build from the ground up. So our team are experts at empowering and setting up sustainable methods that supporting community drinking water systems. Another important aspect is that we leverage market-based solutions that really empower communities to invest in their own systems, which creates a sustainable but also a long-term approach to the problem. And ultimately, we have a very comprehensive approach with the flow of the process, starting from the mountain all the way down to the fountain. And so as you can see, from the mountain up in the water source and finding solutions along the way, making it all the way to the tap in the home. And again, making sure the community, specifically the water boards, have the skills and resources to properly operate. So starting from the water source, we focus on providing water source protection. So our team would go in, we would assess the water source, provide training to the water board, specifically around water source protection. So this could be something as simple as just a physical barrier or a fence to keep livestock out of the way, establishing a watershed reforestation plan, or even just planting trees in the moment. In ideal cases, some of the best systems actually working at the very end and installing water meters, so then the community can keep track of how much water is flowing through this system to identify leaks and also identify and mitigate water waste. These are just some of the examples. In this photo here, you can see this is a very common water source in Ojo de Agua, where the water is dripping down a waterfall. They built a cement protection or containment to contain the water. And the picture looks like the water is somewhat clear. In our experience, this is actually fairly clear water. The turbidity or the suspended solids may be a little high, but then downstream of this, we would have pre-treatment or a slow sand filter to slow the water and filter it out over boulders and rocks and all the way up to sand through a slow sand filter. And then the water would come out looking clear and then providing the water treatment. So this is a pretty simple example of the water source and the protection methods that we do to work with the community to make sure the water it's clean starting at the source. Second aspect is the operation and maintenance or capacity building or technical capacity that we provide to the community, but specifically to the plumber or the fontanero. So starting off, we identify one of the members of the water board to serve as the plumber or the fontanero, and they take on the operations of managing the water system. We actually create a new job position for this, which is paid. And this is really critical because then they're able to dedicate their time. Typically, it's not a full-time position. Maybe it's quarter time or even a half, maybe 2 or 3 hours a day, depending on the water system. But everything from washing the tank out once a week to adding chlorine tablets to measuring the water quality to protecting the water source. We provide all the technical assistance and training to this individual so they are really the water operator and they can provide the clean water to the community on an ongoing basis. Another really important aspect, the water treatment. We have a water chlorinator. It's an inline water chlorinator that we work with the community to install. So chlorine is actually the most effective method at treating water in the world. Both it treats water at the source, but more importantly, it carries a residual that continues to treat the water throughout the water system. So again, in these very basic gravity-fed systems, the water is gathered from the source, up in the mountains, and it is piped down to a tank, and that's where the chlorinator is installed. But from then on, there's still opportunities for potential leaks in the pipes. And sometimes these leaks are so small that you don't know where they are, and so they're small enough that they're not fixed, but bacteria can be reintroduced into the water system. Or, for example, even in the home, people may not wash their hands or their cup may be dirty. You're pouring clean water into that. The chlorine carrying the residual continues to treat the bacteria all along the process. And chlorine is used in over 95% of the developed country municipalities, probably what you're drinking right now. So we found that chlorine is the most effective, cost-effective, and effective method at treating water. And going even further, the chlorinator, the design that we have uses locally sourced PVC pipes, doesn't use electricity. A lot of the rural communities now have access to electricity, but that's the community. Again, these tanks are located sometimes 2 or 3 miles above the community. And so getting electricity there is very, very rare. So having this operate in a very simple way, super easy to calibrate. We again work with the plumber, the town plumber, to operate this, to be able to dose it, and to measure the chlorine levels at various points. And it's really important when they're measuring the chlorine that it's it's high enough that it's killing the bacteria, but not too high, so then they're not getting a chlorine taste in the homes. And so we can calibrate that just right so the communities have the right amount of chlorine that should be appropriate. So once we have the treatment in place, we have to follow up with chlorine distribution. Now we've created a network of over 51 distribution centers. It sounds like a fancy name, but really these are corner stores where we find established entrepreneurs that are already selling something, and we tag on the chlorine tablet sales to their business model to help us distribute. So one chlorine distribution center can distribute chlorine. We have about 8 to 10 surrounding communities. And these are very strategically located. Many times these communities are located on a main access road that lead up to the 8 or 10 surrounding communities. And this really helps us broaden our reach and distribution to the 1,500 rural communities that we have throughout Central America. So we set up and we sell these tablets at a reduced price, so then the entrepreneur can make a small margin. It's actually been pretty neat to see that these entrepreneurs are able to generate up to $150 in profit a month, which is a proper living wage, and they're really doing this as a side hustle. So it's a huge opportunity and a really big win-win for us to create new jobs, but also for them to carry on the distribution of the chlorine throughout. And actually, in just last year, due to the pandemic, we saw a 30% increase in chlorine distribution, as communities wanted to ensure the water was safe, and I guess really a silver lining of the pandemic, and I guess the awareness around public health. Another important aspect is the water board administration. So the next component is really kind of building the capacity of the community water board. So I say the water board a lot. The water board consists of 5 to 7 volunteers from the community. So these are volunteers typically have little to no water experience, but they're really formed to oversee the water system. We identified, as I mentioned, we train one fontanero, one plumber, a paid position to manage and kind of operate on a day-to-day basis. But then we have the water board consisting of the vice president, president, secretary, treasurer, the members that really base and make the decisions on behalf of the community. So we provide administrative training with the community to make sure they're transparent about what they're doing, empowering women to serve in key leadership roles, which we have found to be very successful in improving the quality of the water system and the community as a whole, and also just the promotion of safe handling and hygiene practices, so then they can share that with the community through presentations or trainings. Next aspect is the financial management. And I find this to be one of the most important aspects, because without having the financial management and the systems in place, the community system can't operate properly. So we provide consulting really to the water utility and ensuring the community has the resources to maintain the water system. So each year we coach the community through a budgeting process. Starting with all the costs throughout the year, including a reserve for emergency situations. For example, the back-to-back hurricanes. So making sure the communities have this reserve, and then we go about helping them set an appropriate user water bill. So it covers all the expenses plus the small reserve. And in many cases now we're including watershed protection components, so then it can go towards reforestation up in the watershed protection as they're starting to see the levels of water going down and down year over year. So this is another aspect that we include into the water tariff. And the last part about this, we really focus on the transparency and making sure that the community board is sharing the information with the community, so they're not just raising the rates, they're explaining why they're raising the rates, or if they're even raising the rates, but just showing what goes into that. And then we obviously provide accounting, bookkeeping, and even tariff collections to making sure they're properly collecting and keeping the proper books. So again, things are transparent and working properly. Finally, the last aspect, and one of the most important parts, is the water quality monitoring. So through our community water monitoring model, as we commonly refer to as the circuit rider, we visit and travel to communities on a daily basis. So our staff are able to visit 50 to 70 communities each month under their purview. So our staff are really zipping around the country in motorcycles, visiting these rural communities. And as I mentioned, through the pandemic and even the hurricanes, visiting 50 to 70 communities a month, they're visiting multiple communities a day. So pausing our operations does have a big hit. But that's why we're happy that we're able to leverage some of the mobile technology as much as possible. But ultimately, in-person visits are really critical. And during these in-person visits, we first do a surprise water test. We gather water from some point in the community, either at the tank or the first, middle, or last home, and we track it. We measure for the presence or absence of chlorine. This helps us give a quick sample of the community of water quality. We put this into our database, which then we share with the Ministry of Health, and of course, we share it with the community. And these in-person visits, we also like to encourage and empower the communities, just the importance of safe drinking water. We can also provide technical assistance. And so as I mentioned, throughout all the communities, the 1,500 communities, just last year, over 86% of the communities had safe drinking water all of the time. So ideally, we'd love to have this be 100%, but we have a lot of new communities. We have some communities that are going through different situations. So for us, we have found, again, through the last 10 years of data that we've collected, anything above 80% has been pretty productive. And this is a sample of everyone put together as an average. So some communities on the very low end, and some communities are, 100%. So this is kind of just a check for us to keep track of. And then we can zoom in by region, and that's what we share with the Ministry of Health. So then the Ministry of Health that focuses on one municipality, we share just those communities in that municipality, and they can see the numbers and track. And then obviously prioritize regions that have lower drinking water quality and put more resources into that. So then once the communities in the district are operating at a very high level, we're able to gradually graduate the community out of our circuit rider model. And this is really important for the longevity and really the scalability of our model. So we're able to transition the community and the monitoring to the communities themselves. So we set up a system then by training and continuing doing what the communities are doing of measuring the water quality. But we set up another check where then they take a sample of the water, measure the water quality, send us a text message once a month with the date, location, and the results. And then we put that into our database. And then every 6 months, then we spit them out a result, a report. They can see that we are actually tracking over time. And we're obviously sharing this with the Ministry of Health, but also just kind of holds them a little bit more accountable. And this really transitions us away from the monthly visits. And in the past, it took us 5 or even 7 years to build up the community's level and the capacity of the communities to be at a very high operating level. But now we've really focused our model to be in the communities and working with them for 1 to 2 years and then graduating them out. And in addition, we're working very closely with the Ministry of Health to have them take on the water quality monitoring. Ultimately, this is their job, but with the limited resources that they have, for example, a municipality of 100-some communities, they may only have 1 or 2 technicians. So impossible for them to be able to travel. And they also are in charge of all public health, not just water, sanitation, hygiene, everything else. And so we realize the resources and the lack of resources that they have. So that's why we put the onus on the community themselves. But then we're also able to provide technical assistance. And these graduated communities has been a big success for us, where the communities still reach out to our technicians if something breaks, they need technical assistance or troubleshooting. But ultimately, we're able to, and we can visit if needed, but ultimately we can resolve most of the issues via phone. Excellent. So great. I wanted to share a quick few words from our program coordinator in Nicaragua, Milton Rocha. We pre-recorded this video to mitigate some potential internet issues. He shot this video in front of El Guasimal in La Trinidad. Some of you have actually been to this community. You might even be able to hear the water flowing in the background. Let's give it a listen.
Hello, my name is Milton Rocha, coordinator for the Safe Drinking Water Program for Nicaragua, Adios. I have been working at Adios for 8 years as part of a team that provides clean water to the rural communities. It is our job to make sure that communities are receiving safe water from the mountain down to the top of the fountain. Each visit I make change a life. For that, I am grateful. On behalf of the rural communities and user staff, I want to say thank you. Thank you very much for your support donation that changed the life of many people in Nicaragua and Honduras, including mine and my family. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Awesome. I love that. Sorry for the glitch. I accidentally paused it. Great. So most of you know we're running a 10-day campaign to raise funds to directly support the rural communities that we're working in. 100% of the funds go directly to Central America. In the last week, we've raised just over $33,000, including support from many of you. And I'm so grateful for the generosity during these unique times. Wanted to ask if you're able, I know each situation is different, but love to have you support. By joining the TAP, you'll get access to a unique link where you can see the community's real-time water quality monitoring, the photos and updates of the actions that you guys are investing in. So if you're able to help, we'd love to have your help. Otherwise, spread the word. You can find out great information about this. And before we dive into questions, I wanted to plug quickly our impact experiences. We had a thriving program just prior to the pandemic, and we're hoping to relaunch this. So we're hoping for next February, we have tentatively scheduled 2022 to travel back down to Nicaragua. This is a 4 to 5 day impact experience. Going down, you could see the communities, meet the community leaders in person. We even sprinkle in some visits to the beach or to the rainforest, Nicaragua and Honduras, the land of lakes and volcanoes, or the countryside of coffee. Amazing experience. And so just wanted to pepper that in. If you are interested, please reach out to Lisa. I have her email listed there. And we'll keep you in touch about more experiences moving forward. Great. And with that, wanted to open up the opportunity for some questions. I know we have a couple minutes left. So feel free, if anybody has any questions, to listen in the chat. I'll now go and try to go to the chat and see if I can find anything, see if questions came up.
Hey Wes, as we launch into questions, can you speak to when we might travel to Honduras with EOS? Is that in the book anytime soon?
Yeah, sorry, when I'm saying impact trip, actually, did I say just Nicaragua? I think this next trip will be in Honduras, as our last one was in Nicaragua. And so I think, yes, so Honduras, I think, is the next on the docket.
Awesome, thanks.
Any questions? Question, can you talk about how you're taking and testing water samples, specifically how the local communities are doing this? Great question. So we actually have kind of two methods of doing the water testing. First, we have an in-field test where we do just the presence or absence of bacteria. And so this is to the method called PathoScreen. It's a simple test where we add a reagent to the water and it's able to incubate in ambient temperature or just normal temperatures. And when we do this, this is really our first test. We go into the community and we do two samples. We take one sample, leave it with the community, and take another sample back with us to the office. And then the next day, our technician calls them 24 hours later, calls the community leader and says, you know, look at your result. And it's either it turns a dark brown if the water is contaminated, or it stays kind of a neutral yellow. And so that's a quick presence or absence of bacteria. And that's really effective because it's very visual. The community can see that, okay, the results came back negative or positive. The second aspect we have is an in-lab test where we measure over 14 parameters, physical, chemical, biological, if there's bacteria, if there's arsenic, lead, but also pH conductivity. And so that's kind of a big picture of what is in the water and what the water quality is. And we print that out. And again, we share it with the Ministry of Health, but then we share the results with the community and actually walk them through. It can be daunting having 15 different numbers. What do they all mean? But really explaining what is the result and what do we need to do to mitigate that or improve it. So those are kind of the two main samples that we're doing. And then on an ongoing basis, we measure for the presence or absence of chlorine. And this is the lowest cost method. And we can extrapolate that if there's chlorine in the water, there's not bacteria. So it is safe to drink. So we're not technically measuring the actual bacteria, but measuring the presence of chlorine. And so that is kind of a quick way, and that's what we put in the hands of the community leaders so they can measure if there's being chlorine in the water, even putting it in the hands of the community members so they can hold their water board accountable. And that's what we're tracking the most, and we're doing thousands and thousands and thousands of these tests every month. I'm just actually ordering another packet of reagents here, 10,000 reagents I'm sending down to last our community, you know, our teams maybe only 6 months. So that's something that we're able to put on an easier basis. Great question. Okay, they're coming in now. Great question from Pat. Can you elaborate a little on the data acquisition, MWater tools, and dashboard you're using? Great question. So we've recently transitioned, over the last 3 years, we transitioned all of our monitoring data to MWater. And so we've been tracking now for more than 10 years, as I mentioned, the water quality results, either the more in-depth lab or just the simple presence absence of chlorine. And most recently, the last year or two, we've started tracking water levels. We've been hearing from community members that obviously the water levels are cyclical. So during the dry season, the water goes down, and during the rainy season, the water goes back up. But they're saying year over year in the dry season, the water levels are going down and down and down. So now we're actually tracking this on a monthly basis. And actually, we have the communities measure the water using a 5-gallon bucket, and they time it, and then they're able to figure out the flow rate. So then when we get there, we ask them for that flow rate, we put it into our database. And so we're able to track all the water quality results. We also track all of our activities. So every time they make a visit, what type of a visit is it? Is it a technical assistance visit? Who are we visiting? How many people? And all this information is really good to know for us to keep track of the community response. And again, we share this with the Ministry of Health. And what we really like about mWater is that it's very customizable. We're able to customize the questions, more importantly, the results. So then we can send them a link to a dashboard that they can then filter out. So we, for example, send a municipality their own dashboard, and they can filter out by community. They can realize, drill down to the actual details of the activity of the visit, who last visited them, what was the water quality results, but also kind of look at a bigger picture statistics. What are the water quality results? What's the percent of bacteria contamination in my municipality? So we've been really happy with mWater, and so far our technicians are the ones that are inputting all the data. But as we mentioned, we're trying to transition out, and so now we're receiving water quality reports via text message from the communities that then we're manually importing. And one other aspect, we're working with some partners to look at getting smart sensors. So then if we can integrate the results in the smart sensor water quality results, that could automatically be integrated in mWater, or even through a manual process, but looking at multiple ways to gather the information from the water quality. So big fan of mWater. It took us a little bit to get up to speed, but now it's been a very powerful tool for us. Question from Pat Ward. Can you speak more about your work with the Ministry of Health and the government and the long-term sustainability in that sense? Great question, Pat. I've mentioned the Ministry of Health. We call it MINSA, Nicaragua Ministry of Health, or Secretary of Health in Honduras, Department of Health. In all cases, they are our most strategic partner. They're ultimately doing, they're the enforcer, and they're overseeing the health, the public health, and specifically the water and drinking water. And so everything that we do, starting from the very beginning, we're expanding into new regions into Honduras, and that was actually a demand or request from the Ministry of Health coming to us saying, we want your help to implement your program in these municipalities. And so it's important that we're getting that first ask and the demand from them, but then throughout the process, and realizing that we're training the technicians on the work that we're doing, throwing them on the back of our motorcycle to bring them, to teach them and actually meet the communities, but also realizing that they can't do all of it. They have limited resources. And so we're sharing as much information. We're not doing their work for them, but we're providing a lot of the information specific to water quality, giving them as many tools as they can so they can make the proper decisions at the level that they're at. But strategically, they are very important to us. And on the political side, we stay out of the politics. So we're there to help people and help communities. There's been a lot of political tension, especially with the run-up to elections here in November. We stay out of that, and we're really there to help people. We're not aligning with one party or the other. A question about the Ministry of Health from Selena. Hey, Selena, about the Ministry of Health helps financially support our work. No, unfortunately, sometimes they can't even pay their own water technicians a salary for a month. And so no, financially, we have found more in-kind support from the reporting. For example, we did a large-scale project implementation in a municipality in El Tuma La Dalia. It was about 69 communities that we installed chlorinators and spent a lot of training and organizing groups as a municipality, as a cluster. And so in that case, then they were really involved, and it was really neat to see. And then they were able to do reporting a year later on the positive effects. And they found a 49% reduction in reported cases of diarrhea. And so in that case, they're able to help us perform the water study and with the resources that they already have. So financially, they're not ever investing money, but really the staff that they have and the resources that they have access to. However, the mayor's office does typically have funds to support communities. So we would work with them, for example, to work on a project to potentially subsidize the cost of the chlorinator or provide a new chlorine bank that they can operate. So we do work with some local partners. They're able to subsidize for the communities themselves. But ultimately, we really try to put a lot of the onus on the communities because they're really investing in their systems and their water. And ultimately, the costs are very affordable. $150 for a chlorinator, divided by 100 homes, even 200 homes, it's less than $1 a home. So These are very affordable solutions. It's just getting the community engaged and getting it done. Okay, a chlorine test. So we use a simple called a colorimeter. So we add a reagent and it turns the water a certain color depending on the amount of chlorine. We're using hot products, and so we created our own color wheel. And so dark red, for example, goes up to 5 parts per million, and then down to I think like 0.01 parts per million. Our technicians actually have digital chlorimeters because we're measuring this, multiple times a day. But for the communities themselves, we provide more of a pastilla or like a little tablet that they can put against a color wheel and measure themselves. So really, the accuracy is not perfect, but it shows that there is a presence, and it goes from, like, for example, 1 to 5 parts per million, which is sufficient to where we're calibrating the system. Excellent, Martin. Great to see you. Excellent. Am I missing anything, Lucy?
No, you did not. But was something that has been coming up in my mind is obviously that there is a major migration crisis that is impacting Honduras and folks from Honduras. I'm curious whether the work of EOS, if there's any interface with that political situation happening and potentially helping folks get involved locally in some of the work that EOS is doing.
Absolutely, that's actually a very good question. Yes, and looking at the target population of migration, it's youth, 15 to 30 years old. And so, we work closely with the community water boards, and in those cases, the age of the water board members are typically 30 or 20 to 40. And so there is some overlap in that target population. But more specifically, there's actually an opportunity that we just launched with the U.S. Forest Service working in Honduras to actually hire. There's a youth conservation corps where they're basically training these youth going through a 9-month program to provide leadership skills and training. But we're adding a water quality component to that. And so when they're working and focusing on the conservation, we've taken that and focused that on, for example, watershed protection. So we're going to have these youth come in, we're going to hire them, train our staff on how we can continue to grow our program around the watershed protection, but also hiring these youth and getting them out. And so this is a new program that we're launching to try to get the U.S. Forest Service engaged, and also targeting youth, knowing that, yes, there is going to be more. We want to try to make the lives better in Honduras and Nicaragua to reduce, from the very beginning, to be proactively reduce the migration into, for example, into the U.S.
That's awesome. Very cool. A very unexpected route for EOS to support that work unintentionally, but really engaging and providing leadership and skills development. Awesome.
Great. Well, if there are no more questions, just again want to say thank you all for calling. Try to give you back a couple of minutes of your day. And if you have any other follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.
Take care.
Ciao, ciao.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
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 Yo.